I know that the owner of Farmville, Zynga, is actually a customer of ours, and they were running on Couchbase. And today, one of their most popular applications, Zynga Poker, some of you may be a fan of poker, that is also on Couchbase. So today we'll be focusing a lot on mobile applications and how Couchbase is behind some of the most mission-critical applications out there in the industry. So just a quick agenda. We'll be going through, again, Couchbase overview. Then we'll be deep diving into Couchbase Lite in our application, app services and endpoints, how you can implement some sort of access control and data validation. We'll then be connecting to our application and then sharing some use cases before going deeper into the demo. So to start off, I think Jeannie has touched a bit on it. We have 3 components when it comes to developing mobile applications with Couchbase. The first level is Couchbase Server. We also have Couchbase Capella, which is our database as a service offering. It is a cloud database that can be hosted on AWS, GCP, Azure. And then we have Couchbase Lite, which is a lightweight, full-feature Json database that is embedded into your tablets, into your mobile devices, into your IoT devices, right? And in between lives app services. So app services really facilitates that bi-directional synchronization when there's internet connectivity. And when there's no internet connectivity, you're able to do whatever you need to do on the embedded database, Couchbase Lite. And when internet connectivity regains, app services facilitates that sync. So just a high-level overview, right? When there's no internet connectivity and you require some peer-to-peer sync, you can do that as well. And then app services linking to Capella. So this is how the infrastructure or like the architectural diagram roughly looks like. You have your mobile or your mobile applications or your IoT applications, and then it links to your clusters, which is hosted on, which can be on server, on-prem, or Capella. And then you have your control plane, right, where your users are able to log in, make queries there, and view the documents from the database. So now I really wanted to quickly show you what a demo database looks like. So this is a trial cluster that I've set up. I'm just going to log in, right? Okay, so this is how the user interface looks like, very pretty. And right now what I'm going to do is just to link app services, right? So I'm just going to click link app services. So this takes about 5 to 25 minutes to deploy. And obviously for the session, I've created another cluster, also a demo cluster that has app services already deployed, so we can move smoothly with the demo and presentation. So going deeper into Couchbase Lite. We've talked about it as an embedded database for your mobile, tablet devices, and IoT devices. But really what we want to showcase is that you're able to do all sorts of database activities, right? Database events, document events, you're able to make queries, you're able to have sync, and there's security features on it as well. Right? Jeannie touched on it earlier, right? The multiple SDKs, we support our developers, whether they're Android developers or iOS developers. So moving on into the fun stuff, which is the database, the Couchbase-like application. So I want you to picture with me this, right? Right now, I am a warehouse auditor, right? And I have this application that I have on my phone. And when I'm out in the warehouse, I want to know what projects I need to do, and I want to make modifications to some of the documents, right? And me being out there in the warehouse, sometimes there is no internet connectivity. And what I want is 100% application uptime, even when I'm in the most remote areas in Singapore, right? So right now, I'm just going to log in. Demo@example.com. I'm logging in, and this is what I see in the application, right? I see that there are currently no projects for me, happy days, but also a couple of other features within the application. I'm able to update my user profile. There's a developer tab that I will be soon touching on to load some sample data, and a replication feature within the app, which allows me to actually connect to Capella later on in the demo. So now I'm going to make some quick changes to my user profile just to update the first name, the last name, and my job title, which is warehouse auditor. Okay. So now if I were to save this, also take note that currently I'm not connected to any cloud database, I'm not connected to any server, I'm just on my mobile device, right? So now I've saved it. What I'm going to do is log out, and when I log back in again, I will see that all the information which I had stored for my user details is still within the application. This application runs 100% on the back end of Couchbase Lite. So, moving on to that middle layer which we talked about, right, which is app services and endpoints. And I really wanted to touch on this and give you guys like a demo on it as well. So the flow of the demo will be that I will go in, I've launched the app service in the previous step, I will create the endpoint, which is that public URL that connects my application to my Capella, which is the cloud database. And then I will be able to make additional configurations, right? Like setting up the authentication provider, creating app users and roles, which I'll go into deeper a bit later on, and define some access controls, right? And then I'll be ready to actually connect my application to my cloud database. So just wanted to touch on app services and endpoints in the next 2 slides. App services connects to clusters, right? So if you have one big cluster, that is where app services connects to. And endpoints links directly to each bucket within a cluster, right? So take an e-commerce app, for example, right? You have a full database with different buckets like catalogs, sales, and pricing. And the catalog component of the application will connect to the catalog bucket, and the pricing component of the application will connect to the pricing bucket, right? So now that I've touched on app services and endpoints, I wanted to go back into Capella, which is our cloud database. I'm logging in. And I'll actually be creating a bucket and linking that to my app services endpoint. Right. So data tools, going to bucket. Let me just delete this. That's fine. Let me log out and log into a separate one. Oops. You know what, let me just use this one. Data tools, buckets. So with your trial cluster, it does come with travel sample. This one has projects linked to it already. Let me use another standby which I had. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, let's see. Chrome. Okay, signing in. Okay. Cool. Okay, so this one has my app services created, going to data tools, bucket. So when you have your trial cluster up and running, you do have some sample data already in, which is travel sample. I'm just going to create a new bucket. I'm going to name it projects. I'm going to give it some memory quota. And I'm going to leave the default settings, and I'm just going to hit create bucket. So now that I've created my bucket, I'm ready to link it to my app services endpoint, right? So I'm going to app service, app endpoint, creating a new app endpoint. Going to name it projects, and this is where I mentioned earlier, right? I'm linking it to a bucket. I'm linking it to my projects bucket. You are able to do some authentication and do things like delta sync, which means you're syncing part of the document instead of the full document when changes are made, and import filters. So for import filters, I do have a JavaScript function ready, and I'll be explaining this in just a little bit. So What this JavaScript function does is to import the documents only if the documents are projects or warehouse, users, and audit or items. Okay? Create the app endpoint. And at this point, you'll notice just in a little bit that the endpoint is actually paused, right? And there's a reason for this. So you see here offline, and this is because we can make additional configurations like access control, data validation. We are able to create app users, app roles for access controls. So going back to my slides, we'll be touching a little bit on that now. So starting off with authentication, besides basic authentication, you are able to do things like OIDC or anonymous authentication, which supports unauthenticated read access only. For access controls, Couchbase has 3 separate features, I would say, right? So app users, which is essentially every single one of us, right? We are each an app user. App roles is meant for like teams. So if Jeannie and I are in the same team, we'll be under the same app role, right? And channels. So think of channels as hashtags in Twitter, right? So if you click on a hashtag in Twitter, you'll see many tweets. So similarly in Couchbase, within a channel lives many documents. So this is a pretty good diagram that helps me to explain it, right? So app user 1, he has access to channels 1 and the shared channel, and he'll be able to make reads and writes to the documents which are associated to those channels. App user 2 and 3 belong to the same team, so we are able to classify them under app role 1, and they are able to make reads and writes or modifications to the documents for those specific channels. So that is the form of access control that we're talking about. There's an access control function for data validation, and which I will cover later on during the demo. And when we're ready to connect, we simply hit the connect tab. For the demo, I'll be using the public connection, and you'll see how it's like. So going back to my Capella user interface, I've now set up the app endpoint. It is on pause, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to import a file for my access control and data validation. And this is a pretty simple JavaScript function, right? It does some validation to ensure that the doc type exists. It's then doing some authorization to say that, okay, if a user belongs to a certain team, right, where app role, he's given access to certain channels where the documents are. So I'm now going to save that. And once I save that, I can actually have the option to resume the app endpoint, which I'm going to do. Now I'm going to set up some app roles. So app roles are teams, right? Create app role. I'm going to name this team 1, and I'm going to assign team 1 to all the documents within the channel of channel team 1. Create the app role and create some app users. Very secure password, which I'm going to show everyone. Okay, at this step, I can either assign my app user to specific channels, or I'm able to assign him to the app role, right, the team 1, where he will be given access to channels, documents within the channels where team 1 is accessible to. Right? So just select team 1, and I've created the app user. Okay. So back to the application, I'm just going to split the screen. So this application, has my user profile details. But right now, what I want to do is to actually go to the developer tab. I'm going to load some sample data and view what projects I have today. A bunch of projects, busy day, right? 12 documents, okay? So right now, you're just going to have to take my word for it that there are 12 documents. But later on, I'll show you through a query that there are actually 12 documents. So now that I've set up the app endpoint, it is ready. I just simply go to the Connect tab, copy the public connection URL, go back to my app, and set up the replication. Right, go to the gear icon, sync gateway server URL, just going to paste that from my clipboard, make sure that's the correct one. Okay? And I'm just going to set the heartbeat to 6 seconds to make it faster. So what the heartbeat does is making that connection back to app services and Capella. So I'm just setting it to 6 seconds so that we will see faster results. And I'm going to hit save. And start. So what happens on the back end, under the hood, is that right now replication has started. Previously, I had created a bucket. There were no documents. I had only documents within my Couchbase Lite device. Right now, the replication, the synchronization has started. If I go back to my database, I should be able to see all of those documents. Right, so data tools, bucket, projects, and now you see 793 documents have already been synchronized. Right? And earlier on, I said that I had 12 projects to do now, right? So this is where I want to showcase some of Couchbase query language, right? So this is the query workbench that we have. It's a bit distorted because of the size, but right, it looks good now. So I have prepared some query. So copying this, paste it here. So if you notice, right, this query looks really, really similar to relational database, right, SQL language. And that is because we use SQL++, which is our query language. It has the same syntax as SQL, but on a NoSQL database, on JSON documents, right? So what I'm doing in this query here is to select all attributes from my project bucket, and I'm having some where conditions where my document type equals to projects and my team equals to team 1. So I'm going to hit execute, and what I'm going to see is that Couchbase is going to tell me, hey, there isn't an index, right? So rather than creating an index on your own, where you're thinking, should I create a primary index? Should I create a secondary index? Right? You can actually hit the Advice tab, and what the Advice tab does is to give you the best covering index for that particular query which you're running. And this is something that our customers really love, because they don't have to actually go to their database administrator and figure out what is the covering index that they need. So I'm just going to execute that. It's going to tell me that the index is created, and I can simply go back to my history and rerun the query, which shows me that I have 12 documents, right? So 12 projects for that particular user. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import some data on Capella, which is our cloud database, and we're going to see how it's actually synchronized back to the device. So hit import. For importing of data, you just have to select the bucket that you want to import it to. You can import it in either JSON or CSV format. For myself, I'm doing JSON. And I'm going to choose a file. I have sample data.json. And hit next. Pretty simple. Right? For my scope and collection, this is really like granularity, right? So hit next. For my key, I'm actually going to create a custom key. So what keys are basically, if you think of it in a relational database background, you could compare it to, say, a primary key, for example. It's basically a document ID, right? So this is a sample document that I have. I'm just going to copy it in here and paste it. And I want my document key to be my project ID. So I simply go to the key name generator, and I'm going to put in project ID. Once I'm done with that, you can see here that the generated key name is actually automatically there for me, and I hit next. I'm able to make additional configurations, like to skip some documents, or to limit some documents, or to ignore some fields within a JSON document, right? But for the purpose of the demo, I'm just going to import everything and hit import. So the best part of the demo is about to come, and my session is coming to an end, unfortunately. But right now, what I wanted to do is share some of the use cases that we have in the market, and try to relate to you by having some of the localized examples as well. So across the industries, what Couchbase helps our customers with regards to mobile, essentially is to help them to achieve offline-first few applications, things like cloud edge processing, disconnected edge, and collaboration at the disconnected edge. All right. And if you think about it in Singapore, right, Couchbase actually helps one of the leading insurance companies, right? So think of it this way, right? I'm an insurance agent. I finally get a chance to meet my client at a cafe for a session. I bring out my iPad, but the waiter tells me, no Wi-Fi for you today, right? But all is not lost because this device is, has a backend of Couchbase Lite. I'm actually able to get the signature from my customer, upload the invoice, the PDFs, and when I'm back into my office or back at home where there's internet connectivity, synchronization can then take place, right? This means that no deal is ever lost because of the lack of internet connectivity. Carnival Cruise Lines is something that I wanted to touch on as well. So Carnival Cruise is the world's largest travel leisure company, right? And what they had was pretty interesting, right? They had this thing called an ocean medallion device. So when you're stepping on board a cruise, they actually give you this device, which can be worn as a bracelet or as a necklace, and it interacts with sensors all around the ship, right? You order a Coke at the pool, and the next moment, you go to the casino. The waiter knows exactly where you are to deliver your order to you, right? But what the challenge Carnival Cruise had was after collating all this data and all this information, how are they then able to store it back into their server, right? And this is where Couchbase came in with Couchbase Lite embedded in their IoT device and with app services to actually synchronize the data back to their servers.
Just on that, they have a Couchbase server on the cruise ship. Okay, so Couchbase Lite will synchronize the data to Couchbase server, and then when they sailing close to the shore, when they actually pick up the internet, because as you can imagine, Starlink is pretty expensive as well, right? You keep streaming data, when you're in the ocean, but when you get closer to shore, when you're in the infrastructure, then they synchronize the Couchbase server on the cruise ship to the central, database. And again, not everything, only selected data that defined by the business model.
Yeah, exactly. So earlier on, I had 12 documents, and right now, my manager has uploaded a couple more documents into the database, and I'm running this query right here that shows me that, okay, previously I had 12 documents. Now if I'm going to execute this query again, it's going to tell me, hey Ben, you're in team 1, you now have 15 projects to do, right? Busy, busy day. So if I go back to my application, and I go to my home page, and I scroll all the way down, I actually see 3 new documents which are ready for me, 3 new projects which are ready for me. So I have to do auditing for Santa Clara Warehouse 100, 101, and 102, right? So right now, I actually go to the warehouse and I actually go about my business as usual activities. And right now, what I'm going to showcase to you is a bi-directional synchronization, right? So with internet connectivity, I'm just going to make some changes to the document. I'm just going to say online. I'm going to show you what the document actually looks like before I edit it in the database. So that's the document key. Get document. So right now in the database, it shows Santa Clara Warehouse 100 right here. Okay? In the database, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit save. And because there's internet connectivity available, synchronization takes place immediately. And if I do a simple refresh, I see Santa Clara Warehouse 100 online. Just going to highlight it for you here. Right. Similarly, if my manager wants to make some changes on the database, it will be reflected in the application. Right. So just going to simulate that, going into the document, making some changes. I'm just going to add Capella to the end of the project title. Hit save. And within the application, if I scroll all the way down, it shows Santa Clara Warehouse 100 online Capella. Right? So now what happens when I actually go to the warehouse or go to a remote area where there's no internet connectivity? Right? I'm going to simulate this by turning on the airplane mode. So as all of us know, when I turn on the airplane mode, things go red. It's going to tell me that there's no internet connectivity. Right? But no worries, because I know that this application is running on the back end of Couchbase Lite. I'm able to make some changes, like Santa Clara Warehouse 100 offline. Gonna hit save. Right, so it's reflected in the application. If I go back to my database and I paste the document ID and I get the document, obviously it wouldn't be reflected because there is no internet connectivity and synchronization can't take place just yet. So now I'm going to simulate what happens when I go back to the office or go back home where there's internet connectivity. Just going to turn off the airplane mode. And immediately, I go back to my database, hit refresh, and what you'll see is that the title of the project has now been updated to Santa Clara Warehouse 100 offline. Right? This is what the insurance companies do. This is what the use case of, say, healthcare industry does. When they're out in the remote areas, they're actually collating some of critical information, right? Think of it when heli rescue, right? You're going to a remote area, but you're keying in the crucial statistics of that patient, right? Back at the hospital after the helicopter has landed, while they're pushing the patient back into the hospital, that data is actually being synchronized to the cloud, and the doctors in the surgical room are actually able to get it just like that fast.
So I think nowadays you can use that, use application layer to deal with that. But the key thing here is when the turn off the airplane mode, there's no other action, no other things that the app needs to do. The database just connects and take the data. So it will help you to accelerate your entire development and leave the database, leave all of those synchronization works in the database.
Exactly, to that point, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so there are conflict resolution methods that we can have in place. We would actually, I would actually love to do a deep dive with you, explain to you the different conflict resolution. But as a whole, there are two different conflict resolution methods. One is a compare and swap based on the version. The other one is based on how many modifications were there with their data, right? So version is of course through timestamp and figuring out which one is the latest version, and yeah. So that's a great question, right? But yeah, to what Jimmy mentioned, all this that I've showed today are database activities. They aren't application activities, right? And that is how we are actually able to get our customers, applications up and running that quickly, right? Because there isn't much for them to develop. It comes right out of the box with Couchbase. And with that, we've come to the end of the presentation, and we open the floor for questions.